Alright, this is the first of two videos explaining the questions that you saw in the Chapter 9 assignment. Let's start with this one. CanCorp just paid a dividend of $1.50 a share. The dividend is expected to grow 9% a year for the next 3 years, and then at 4% a year thereafter. What is the expected dividend that is expected to be paid out at the end of year 5? Okay, first things first. Just paid. What does that mean? Just paid a dividend of $1.50 a share. So in some of the examples that we saw for problems involving stock valuation, it's really important to note if the dividend we're working with is D0 or D1. When you see words like just paid, that signals that it's D0. Right? So even though this doesn't say D0, we have to interpret that just paid, quote unquote, as D0. All right, so we just received a dividend of $1.50 a share. That's the first thing that pops out. And that dividend is going to grow 9% a year for the next 3 years, and then 4% a year thereafter. What is the dividend at year 5? All right, so it doesn't seem too bad. We can actually set up a formula. Right, so D0 multiplied by 1 plus g to the nth power, where n is time, is going to equal the dividend of n. Alright, so this works if the growth is constant. If we have non-constant growth, we're going to have to modify this just a little bit, but we can still apply this to the question. We can also multiply the dividend by the first year growth rate, the second year growth rate, the third year growth rate, the fourth year growth rate, and the fifth year growth rate. But if you're like me, you like to save time. All right, so for this particular problem, we could say that D0, remember there's going to be 3 years of 9% growth. So that 3, in this case n, is going to be the 3 years. We could do the same thing for the next 2 years. So after that 3-year period, growth is constant at 4%. So we're trying to figure out what the dividend at 5 is. So 3 plus 2 gives us 5 years of time that we're dealing with. And this works for us as well. All right, so let's plug in the dividend. So D0 is $1.50. We can simplify everything a little bit. So we can add 1.09 and the 1.404. Then we're going to distribute the exponents. Right, I do recommend that you round to at least 4 decimal places to avoid rounding errors. Right, these numbers are pretty small, so if we eliminate some of them, it could throw our answers off a little bit, even though we do it right. For the most part, it shouldn't matter, but if you do 4 decimal places, you should get the same answers as I'm getting, which will make you feel a lot more confident than if your answers are off a couple cents. All right, when we multiply that, we're left with $2.10. And that is our answer, $2.10. All right, it's possible to get $2.11. Even if we do have rounding errors, the difference should be a couple pennies, and that's okay. Especially if you show your work, I will give partial credit for that. All right, let's move on to the next problem. A stock is expected to pay a dividend of 75 cents at the end of the year, and it should continue to grow at a constant rate of 5% a year. If its required return is 9%, what is the stock expected price 4 years from today? All right, a lot of stuff with this question. It looks pretty straightforward, but there's a couple of tricks here that the writers of the question are trying to test us on. So first thing is expected. All right, that's going to be an important word. Stock is expected to pay. Remember how we were talking about knowing if we're working with D0 and D1? Well, here's a situation that's going to help us confirm what dividend we're working with. So if it's expected to pay, that means we haven't received it yet. If we haven't received it yet, that means it's going to be D1. Okay, so expect to pay a dividend, so D1 is 75 cents. All right, it's going to grow at a constant rate, emphasis on the word constant, because that's going to be really important and help us save a lot of time. So if growth is constant, we can apply our constant growth models. Its required return is 9%. What is the stock price 4 years from today? Okay, so we're given what we need to figure out the value today, but we don't know what the value is 4 years from today. All right, so let's start off with the price today. We know we can work with that. All right, growth is constant, right? Yeah, it said constant growth. Remember, our other requirement for using the constant growth model is if the required return is greater than our growth rate. So is that applicable here? Sure enough, it is. Right, if you look back at the question, the required return is 9%, but the growth rate is 5%. So is 9 greater than 5? It sure is. So that means we can use our constant growth formula, which we call the discounted dividend model. And that's given to us as P equals D1 over the difference of the required return and the growth rate. All right, so let's plug in what's given. So we have 75-cent dividend, and we know that is D1 because remember it said expected. So if it said it paid a dividend of 75 cents, then we'd have to apply the growth rate to the dividend to get it to D1. But in this case, we don't have to make any conversions. All right, 9% is our required return that's given to us, and our growth rate, constant growth rate, is 5%, which is also given to us. So we do the math. We're left with a price of $18.75. Now remember, the price is now. So if we go to timeline, this is the price at 0. We want to know the price at 0.4 on the timeline. Okay, so what we can do, since growth is constant, we can just apply the growth rate to this. Right? You can use the same trick that we used for the dividends. 1 plus our growth rate to the nth power will give us the future price of n. So in this case, our formula is going to look something like this. We're going to take our price today, $18.75, multiply it by 1 plus our growth rate of 0.05, 5%. Because we want to know 4 years from today, we're going to multiply it to the 4th power. That's going to give us a value of $22.79. Hopefully that's not too bad. All right, so 4 years from today, we'd expect the stock, assuming growth is actually 5% year after year. The stock should be selling for a price of $22.79 4 years from today. All right. Let's do the other 2 questions in the next video. All right, so please look at that if you want to review those questions.